Okay, everybody, thank you very much, and welcome. This is a budget subcommittee of the board. We've met several times already this year, but given the comments last year, I think particularly by John Sewell and others about the necessity to have a discussion in public, we thought we would make this an open session. So we will start, Tony, with your presentation of the operating budget. Mark, is there anything you want to add, or other committee members? I'm joined by Councillor Carroll and Board Member Marie Mulliner. You have to push the side button, Marie, or Shelley. Power on and then turn it on. Yep, you got it. Shelley, you've been at all these other ones. Do you want to make any comments?
Well, I should just say I don't have my diligent board book because I'm iPadless today. So if we're gonna go beyond the PowerPoint and reference the longer documents, then I need them circulated.
Over to you, Tony.
I think today's, do you want me to start? Okay, so the goal today is, this is, as the chair has indicated, this is a public meeting of the board budget subcommittee. And I think the intent, as the chair stated, is really to allow, before the actual budget gets approved or considered and approved by the board at the October 20th meeting, is to give members of the public an opportunity to provide input into that budget. The budget, the information that's on the board's website, and we've posted information in the past, but this year we've actually provided a line by line that shows experience and the trend in terms of the various expenditures and revenues that we incur. So that was posted for the public to see. We also posted what we call at the unit program level by feature grouped categories, so salaries, benefits, materials and supplies, etc. And that, again, is to give the members of the public an idea of where the monies are being spent in the organization. And we also provided the board, and again in the spirit of transparency, and we provided this information, as I said in the past, is the presentations that we actually did to the board budget subcommittee, so they could see the information at a high level of where the board budget subcommittee sits on this, right? I don't think we're going to need diligent board books. This presentation is really intended, and we're going to keep our comments really short. We really want the public to be able to provide their comments so that the board budget subcommittee and the full board can consider them as part of the process. So what we're going to cover today, and I want to just, with me today to present is Sandra Calafretti, our Director of Finance and Business Management, and Cindy Grant, who's our Manager of Budgets. We're going to talk about the preliminary budget, reduction in actions that we've taken, the revised budget. We're going to talk about staffing numbers, since they represent 90% of our budget. We'll look at the budget history and the impact of the salary settlement. And we don't look at budgets just for the current year. We're actually looking at budgets in terms of a 3-year period. So we'll give the board, budget subcommittee, and the public an idea of where we're sitting there. We're also going to cover the parking enforcement budget, as well as our capital program for the 2017 to 26 period. So our approved budget in 2016 was 1004.7. Part of the process, and this is consistent with what other city divisions, ABCs do, is to basically capture pressures that we know about. So we know that going into this thing, we had a $3.5 million benefit and non-COLA, so non-salary, and that could be contractual in terms of vendor contracts pressure. We know that because we've deferred contributions to the reserve in the past, we had a $7.2 million pressure there in terms of incremental funding that we needed in our base budget to enable us to buy the equipment and meet other needs that are covered in the reserve. We know that through the TTF, there's going to be investments that are going to have to be made in order to allow the implementation of many of the recommendations in that report. And so there's money that we want to set aside for that. We also know that based on what we know today, We don't have firm contractual agreements with the province in terms of grant funding for the 2017 year, and so if we don't get that money, that causes a pressure. And finally, we know that based on the collective agreement that was negotiated a couple of years ago, that in 2017 we've got an $18 million pressure in terms of COLA adjustments that we're going to have to provide to our members. Those total $47.4 million. So going into this, our request, with all those known pressures and without actually now looking at areas that where we can reduce, our budget was at 1052.1, which would represent a 5% increase over 2016. One of the things that came out of the board and the TTF was the moratorium on both uniform and civilian hiring. That actually saves us $23 million in 2017. So now we're down to 1029.0, which is a 2% increase. And really our goal from what the chief and the board asked us to do is at least zero and hopefully below zero. So we still had about $24 million to find.
Tony, just for everybody's benefit, TTF is the Transformational Task
sorry.
Force that's
I'm
been
sorry.
meeting.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. So here are some of the reductions that so this is a process that was started in May. It's a process that has continued through the budget subcommittee meetings in September and October. It's a process that continues probably up until the budget gets approved both by the board and then by the city in February of next year. So it's a very dynamic process that changes both up and down as more up-to-date information becomes known. And so it's an ongoing process until the budget actually gets approved by City Council in February. So you'll see some of the things that we've reduced. We've talked about the premium pay. Premium pay has been reduced probably by about close to $9 million in the last 4 to 5 years. We've taken another $2 million reduction in that area. We're projecting greater separations in 2016, so that if that happens, we actually will have 15 fewer people on our payroll in 17, and so that is a pressure. We've got service contracts. We've also looked at some of the smaller discretionary items. So if you look at courses and seminars and conferences, the chief has indicated a 5%, asked for a 5% cut across the board on that. So that saves us some money. Public relations, a 20% cut on top of cuts that we have already made. We're asking the city to allow us to use our surplus in 2016 to provide us with some seed money for the $3.5 million that we're going to need to implement some of the recommendations that come out of the task force. So that actually, if we can do it that way, we don't have to provide the $3.5 million in our budget. The final step of VoIP, which is voice over internet protocol, allows us to now save close to $800,000 on our phone costs. We've also moved some expenses like bargaining to the reserve. Computer maintenance, we've been able to negotiate lower costs of $500,000. And we're also assuming that because both lifeguards and school crossing guards are not core services to the police, that we're divesting ourselves of those services. And so in 2017, the cost of that is $3.8 million. That annualizes to about $7 million. So when you take all those reductions into play, you basically are, those all add up. So if you look at this chart, sorry, Sandra. That's not where we're at. The next one, the chart. That's not it. That's it? Yes, or a new clicker. Okay, there we go. Let's not touch it. So if you look at our gross request, this is before we even take revenue into account, we found about $25 million in reductions. And if you look at those accounts, salaries, benefits, premium pay, reserves, and non-salary, other than benefits, which is trending upwards because of just an increase in the cost of those benefits, and the fact that we have to start reinvesting in our reserves and making the contributions that we need on an annual basis in order to pay for the things, that equipment and other things that we need. Everything else has gone down. We've got a $27 million reduction in salaries. We've got a $2 million reduction, as I indicated before, in premium pay. Even in our non-salary, through opportunities, through efficiencies that we've been able to generate, we've got a $1.6 million reduction there. So that takes us down to $25 million. The fact that we're unsure around the provincial grants, because we've reduced our court security and court services costs, we actually lose some grant money because of the lower cost. So that costs us about $2 million. But we actually have a pressure of about $6 million there, unfavorable in revenues. So our request then, when you take that into account, gets down to $19 million, which really gets us down to $2 million below our approved budget of 2016, which was 1004.7. So right now, and please remember, we're still going through the process, both with the command and with the board, before we get to the October 20th meeting. We're sitting at a budget request of 1002.7, which is $2 million below the approved budget of 2016. And that means that we essentially absorb all the cost of living increases and some of the other collective bargaining increases, and have been able to do that through moratorium, as well as efficiencies that we've identified in a number of different areas. This chart, I think, very clearly illustrates where we were and where we're going to be. And so you'll see that the dark line is really our approved establishment, that's positions. The bars are actual people on our payroll. So from a uniform perspective, you can see that we've gone from 5618 approved establishment. Right now we're at 5448. The bulk of that difference is the civilianization of certain uniform positions. So we actually went up 148 on the civilian side. But I think the number that's really important, or the information that's really important, is that the bar that shows that in 2010, we had 5,615 officers at our disposal to provide public safety services to the city. In 2017, we'll have on average 5,000 officers, and based on the TTF recommendations, we will be at 4,767, or very close to 4,750 in 2019. So essentially, we're down about almost 850 positions from where we were at in 2016. So we're going to manage that by changing the way that we do business through the various recommendations that are coming through the TTF, so that the person on the street doesn't notice any reduction in service. So there's a transitional period then that we have to go through in order to achieve that. The civilian side is no different. On the civilian side, we actually budget for whoever the positions, and then we gap those positions. We reduce our budget because we know it's going to take some time to fill positions. Normally that gap is around 5%, 4.9%. And so you can see in the last few years, in order to achieve certain budget reductions, our gapping is actually now going to be 11% in 2017. It was 8.7% in 2016. Almost double what we would call standard gapping, almost 4 times what the city gaps. So, and again, in order to achieve the level of savings that the board expects us and the city expects from us, these are decisions that we're going to have to be made in order to achieve that. And whether we want to accept it or not, there are certain service implications that will come out of that we're going to have to manage as an organization. So everybody talks about the growth in policing, and I'll just talk about the Toronto experience. And so if you look at this chart, what it shows is the blue line is where our budget has been, the total budget, starting in 2006. And so you could see it went from around $750 million in 2016 to just over $1 billion in 2017 net. The red line shows what our budget would have been if we didn't have any collective bargaining increases during those years. And so you'll see that our budget would have been at $750 and would have increased by about $21 million for non-COLA type expenditures during that period. $21 million over, let's say, a 12-period year, that's like less than what, $2 million a year in non-COLA expenditures. we've held the line on non-COLA expenditures. What's driven the cost of policing is the collective agreement settlements that have been negotiated and arbitrated during that period of time. The reality is, if you could keep that slide up, that if the increases had been even in the 2% range, we'd probably be in about the $850 million range. The last collective agreement has now reduced our pressure from what used to be on average 3% from collective agreement to actually under 2%. So we're going in the right direction in that regard. As I indicated before, we can't just look at budgets in annual increments, because there's decisions that are made in one year that ultimately affect future years. And so, as I indicated before, in 2017, right now, and still subject to board approval and consideration and city council approval, we're basically sitting at -$2 million over the budget of 2016. In 2018, this is the first time we've been under zero. We've been at zero, but this is the first time that we've been under zero. That's correct, Mr. Chair. So if you look at 218, sorry, you'll see that, again, we're going to have another collective agreement pressure. We've got as I indicated before, the school crossing guard, lifeguard programs, they actually annualize, so we actually save some more money there. But then you've got the cumulative impact of the salary settlement, which goes from $17.3 million to $34.4 million. And so right now, based on what we know today, right, we're projecting, and then we've got, again, the moratorium, which saves us, cumulatively $43.2 million. But right now, without even putting another drop of gas in our cars before we know any of those inflationary pressures, we're looking at a cumulative pressure of $2.5 million in 2018 and a $13.9 million pressure in 2019. So in order for us to move forward, we really have to find savings that are not just one time, or revenue enhancements that are not just one time, but sustainable. And that's our goal as an organization, is really to contain the cost of policing, not only in the short term, but in the longer term as well. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sandra to take us through both the parking enforcement budget as well as the services 2017 to 26 capital program. Sandra.
So thank you, Tony. If I can get this working. Okay, so I'll just take you through the parking enforcement budget at a summary level very quickly. Just to give you a little bit of information in terms of how parking operations are organized, the service is responsible for the enforcement side of the parking program, and we are also responsible for the training and oversight for municipal law enforcement officers. The City of Toronto is actually responsible for the revenue processing piece, and then the court services, judicial, legal piece. So they basically take care of the laws as well as and collecting the revenues. So the City of Toronto collects all the revenues. The service does not actually benefit from any of the revenues that are collected for the parking enforcement program. The revenues are actually impacted by a number of different initiatives. Any initiative that's put forward by City Council, or in terms of increasing fines or specialized programs, will actually increase or impact the amount of revenue that is received by the city, as well as any bylaw changes that are made impact the revenue. And then there's also the enforcement levels, and really the compliance pieces. So if everybody's following the rules, there are not going to be that many parking tickets that are being issued. So that is going to impact revenues overall. So when we looked at the parking budget and worked with the parking enforcement unit, we actually applied the same strategies with that group that were applied within the service. So you'll notice that much like the service budget, everything is a reduction as far as expenditures is concerned, with the exception of the benefits, the cost of benefits. The cost of benefits are trending upwards. That is the result of the benefit mix that's being utilized by members, as well as a new contract with respect to the outsourcing of the administration of benefits. We did make one increase to the parking budget, which is an increased contribution to the vehicle and equipment reserve. The City of Toronto, in conjunction with the province, will be rolling out an administrative penalty system, and that will require an enhanced wireless device to be used by parking enforcement officers. The objective is to gather digital images as part of the ticketing process. So the enhancement to that equipment will result in an extra $440,000 being contributed to the vehicle and equipment reserve on an annual basis to support and fund the increased cost of a brand new device that's actually replaced through a life cycle program every 5 years. So that has been an increase in the budget. And then the other increase is the result of the salary settlement for the parking enforcement officers. So the budget increase for parking enforcement has gone from $45.9 million to $46.7 million, an increase of $791,000 or 1.7%. So then I'll also go over the capital program. The service follows the city guidelines and instructions with respect to our capital program. Our strategic direction is we really look at for capital programs that result in long-term organizational benefits. Those capital projects can be funded from debt funds, which are borrowed by the city on our behalf, reserves that are funded through operating budget contributions. So as Tony mentioned in his presentation for the operating budget, over the last few years, we have actually been cutting the required increases to support the equipment, the purchases of equipment that we need or the replacement of equipment that we need. We really need to start increasing those contributions to be able to fund those purchases in the future. Or that reserve or that bank account will essentially run out of money and we'll have to look for other sources. And then there's also developmental charges, which again, following the city guidelines, fund a number of our projects. So what we look for in terms of our strategic direction for our facilities, we are looking at a reduced footprint. So that's why you'll see a project where we are going to be looking at realigning facilities projects. We also want to enhance information and communication needs. We are looking at optimizing technology, both inside the organization as well as what our officers use to provide public safety. We are looking at transparency and accountability, as well as maintaining the equipment that we currently use on a day-to-day basis. So at a very high level, our 10-year program is worth $528.7 million. $296.3 of that is funded from our vehicle and equipment reserve and developmental charges. Debt-funded projects amount to $232.4 million, which is actually the city's target for debt funding for the service. And on average, we meet the annual debt funding in both the 5-year and the 10-year programs. So we've got a number of projects that continue to receive funding in 2017. They are continuing from prior years. We continue to manage the state of good repair of the facilities that we have right now, either as a result of daily maintenance requirements or occupational health and safety requirements. We need to make sure that those facilities continue to be in good repair and in good condition for both our members and the public. We have a Transforming Corporate Support project, which is an internal services project between finance, IT, and human resources that will be continuing in 2017, as well as our peer-to-peer site and our enterprise business intelligence and our radio replacement. We also have a very preliminary estimate in our budget for the amalgamation of 54 and 55 division, which we will start in 2017. So the 2017 budget for those continuing projects is $22.7 million. We also have two new projects that are beginning in 2017. One being the expanded use of conducted energy weapons, as well as the start of a non-binding RFP process for body-worn cameras. Those two projects are valued will require funding about $1.3 million in 2017. The reason why we have not really enhanced the 2017 capital program is because we are actually starting to, or we are looking more strategically in terms of future projects. As a result of the work being done by the task force, the modernization of the service, we are actually looking at doing more due diligence when it comes to any projects that we had in the program in prior years moving forward. So things like our facilities. So in 2017, or in 2018 and beyond, we've actually allocated about $178 million to facilities realignment. That project will actually be populated after demographic work and boundary assessment work is done, and with the objective of a reduced footprint for the service. We also have two other projects that are in 2018 and beyond, and that is a life cycle replacement for our automatic fingerprint identification system, our AFIS system, as well as some property and evidence warehouse racking to alleviate some of the current pressures that we have regarding record retention and storage associated. So
Mr. Chair, if I could add, capital programs, as Sandra said, they're long-term and they're strategic. And so the service in the first, if we can go back to 2006, was really more interested in and had to upgrade its bricks and mortar. And so strategically, a lot of the money spent in that first, let's say, 5 to 7 years was to upgrade our facilities. We've now made a very strategic assessment through the work of the task force, as well as the service itself, that we need to now shift our focus strategically on information technology. So programs that are in there right now is like projects like enterprise business intelligence, and strategically from a bricks and mortar perspective, we're actually going to reduce the number of facilities. We want to reduce our footprint. We don't need as many facilities to actually provide the service that we provide, and that one in itself will not only save us monies in terms of overhead, but will allow us to return those properties to the city so that they can monetize them and do as they see fit. So strategically, we have shifted from a bricks and mortar perspective and now have a legacy in terms of up-to-date facilities to a more to information technology, which is really what's required to move the organization forward in terms of the services that we provide to the public. And that concludes our presentation.
Questions, colleagues? You want to do depositions first, Shelley? Okay. Tony, Sandra, don't go far, but thank you very much. I've got three depositions. First, John Sewell. John, the rules still apply, 5 minutes, but the good news is I don't have my timer. I've got to use my BlackBerry, so you may actually.
Literally no other detail. So there's the line by line, and then there's commentary. And to me, what was remarkable is the documents bear no relationship to each other. I looked very carefully at the line by line documents, and basically what it says is we're going to operate all of those departments, the 5 departments, basically the same way we did in 2016. If you look at the corporate services, the staffing remains the same, the budget remains the same. Operations support well, the staffing goes down a bit, and the budget goes down a bit, but it's very close. Community safety, police divisions, all about the same as ever, almost $500 million, same staff. So the line-by-line budget doesn't tell you much about what's going to change and what's not going to change. It basically says we're spending the same amount of money in the same way as last year, generally. The commentary, or what I call the commentary, is the projection that you heard this afternoon from staff, indicating where, in fact, they managed to save money in order to get to $2 million less than from last year. So I won't go through that. But in fact, there's a number of issues that are raised by comparing the two documents. The one that says nothing is changing, and the other one says, oh yeah, there's a lot changing. For instance, we have no idea where the reduction in 150 officers is going to occur. Well, that's fairly important, you know. Budget should tell you how you're going to spend money, what you're spending it on. There's no information on that. Is it going to be spread equally among the divisions, as an example, and the detectives? Or are there priorities? I suspect it should be priorities about things that you aren't going to cut on, things that you are. But there's no information on that. Secondly, there's no information about the reductions in civilians. It looks as though there's a 10% cut in civilians. No idea where that is. Thirdly, no information is given about the savings as a result of the cancellation of Davis. We, of course, are delighted that Davis is over. We think it was a mistake to begin with. But in fact, where are the savings that are going to happen because we don't have that? Now, the fact that there are no funds for body cameras, I'll get to that when we talk about the capital budget. I wasn't aware of that. No funds or staff have been trimmed from the recruitment function, even though we know that no new officers are going to be hired for the next 3 years. Well, gee whiz, it seems to me it easily cuts the staff there because they aren't going to be doing the kinds of things they were doing. And there's no questions about work priorities and you know how the budget is going to reflect that. A sixth point is that very little or nothing has been done in the past to replace officers with civilians, as far as I can see. The budget doesn't reflect that, when in fact it's clear that that's a good way to save money, as even mentioned in the presentation that was the case, but in fact there's nothing in the budget about that. And then there's nothing in the budget to talk about the implementation of the task force recommendations. There is a bit of increase in staffing in the Chief's Department. I don't know if that's what that's about or not. So the conclusion I would draw is that once again, you prepared a budget which basically said, here's the big pot of money which we want to spend. Happens to be a wee bit less than last year, $2 million less than last year, but nevertheless a big pot of money. But in fact, there's no idea about how you're going to spend it. So there's no real oversight. Other municipal functions actually have a budget and say, here's how we're going to spend the money. But for some reason, the police don't work on that basis, and I think that's wrong. I would have hoped that the Transformational Task Force would have signaled an end to this way of running the police department, but that has not happened. It might have resulted in the fact that we're going to spend $2 million less, but it gives us no idea how we're spending that money. And so I would argue, Toronto Police Accountability Coalition argues, the case has not been made as to why the police should get any funds beyond what City Council has requested. That's the $978 billion. We know that if the police do get more, others are going to get less. And some of those are really, really important services. And of course, we find, that, according to a STAR poll, that the police service thinks, the majority of people think the police should be reducing their budget. So, we think until you can actually make the case and show the priorities about spending, there's no need to go beyond the 978. Very briefly on the capital side of things.
John, you have 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. You know, you're dealing with $1 billion budget, and first of all, I think that going ahead on tasers without a public hearing is so wrong to put money in the budget. The last time you had a public hearing on this, about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, 47 people spoke from the public. Not one of them said you should spend money on tasers. Not one. And here we are, I mean, I thought the chief was going to go ahead. He talked about it publicly, we need tasers. I never expected it would come ahead in a capital budget like this. Get it out. Get rid of it until you've got approval from the public on that.
John?
Body cameras, same thing. I did the report on, we're speaking on that at the board. There's no justification for going ahead with body cameras. Anyway, there you go. 5 minutes to talk about $1 billion budget.
First of all, thank you very much. Second of all, both of those have not yet been approved by the board. They're getting in the budget, but neither one has come forward yet. And the whole discussion, because I think it was more like 3.5 years ago, we did at City Hall, you recall, 6 hours of, as you say, 40 some odd depositions. So it's an issue that will be revisited in that fashion. Tony, anything you want to respond? This is not a board meeting, it's a committee meeting, so we have some flexibility.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Sewell, for your presentation. I think the service is going through a transition, and so this is the start of that through the task force. When you talk about the allocation of 150 officers, that's a decision that the chief is going to make as those officers are reduced. Those are decisions that we make every day as people leave. The numbers that are in the report, and perhaps we should have qualified it, people in recruiting, as example, we have gone down 40%. One, because we're not recruiting as many people, both civilian and uniform, but also because there's efficiencies that we've created in that area. That number will come down even lower. So it's a number that you can keep your eye on because it will be lower as we move forward. I know in the report you're absolutely right, but the thing is we can't keep changing these numbers, so we're waiting for final approval before we give final numbers. This was intended to give you sort of an idea of where the budget sat so that you could provide input. We appreciate that input. We're going to take that into account in terms of moving forward.
Colleagues, any comments? Marie?
My question is more around your observation about how this process worked this year compared to past years, because I know we're really trying to put the right amount of information into the public domain. The numbers are not perfect, and I think I appreciate Mr. Veneziano's observations. So was there anything that worked better for you this year, and is there anything that you might suggest as we move into a more participatory budgeting approach might work better in the future?
So I like line-by-line budgets. I happen to think for the public, there's no need to make them 400 pages long. I think that intimidates an awful lot of people. I think it would be very easy to list the units, which are in the line-by-line budget. Just say, here's the total amount of money. In your 6-page breakdown at the end, it sort of shows this is salary, but in fact, so that's one thing. Simplify the process. Make it so the public can get hold of it. The fact there's only 3 people here is, I wish you luck looking at this stuff. We've actually had it a week, right? About a week, not a long time. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that I think that the figures you have to give out have to have some meaning. When they're exactly the same as last year, you just think, well, there isn't any change. Now, we hear there is going to be change. Well, if it's a budget, the budget says, here's how we're going to spend the money next year. And that is not reflected in the line-by-line budget, and it should be. I have the impression, and I might be really wrong about this, but I have the impression that during the year, not much changes in terms of how the police force is going to change next year. Nobody's actually figured out what are the priorities, where are we going to spend money? What should we be doing? I don't get that at all. I really get the sense police think, well, we're going to get a big pile of money and let's just go on the same way we did. And that's what the line-by-line so that if you're actually doing it, you'd be coming forward and saying, okay, so that in terms of recruitment, as an example, it would have been reflected in the line, but we actually would have some idea. Here's what we're going to do about recruitment. Of course we're going to reduce. Here's what the effect of getting rid of TAVIS. We've known about TAVIS, getting rid of it for a year. You could easily say, oh, here's the impact of that. My understanding is a lot of TAVIS was overtime. Well, if that's the case, okay, let's see the reduction on that, or whatever. So that's, they're the two big changes. One, make it simple so it's easier to understand. The third thing is that I think in just saying detectives, $100 million, without dividing it down, how much are we spending on guns and gangs? There's a lot of good police documentation now in the literature that says this is not the way to deal with young kids. It's bad. It's the wrong way of dealing with them. There's better ways of actually trying to prevent kids from getting into that stuff. There's a whole bunch of information on that. Well, but if we said, oh, here's what we're spending, and here's what we're spending on the mobile crisis intervention teams, and all, that would be good. But there's no data on any of that. So, it means carrying through the line-by-line stuff to the really important stuff that the public sees. So that would be the third change. None of these bulk thing detectives, blah. There is somebody sent me a note a couple of weeks ago, 4 or 5 years ago, saying, well, the problem in Toronto is that homicide is underfunded. Oh, that's interesting. I have no idea if that's true or not. I have no idea how much is spent on homicide. Maybe, might be overfunded. The point is, I haven't got any figures on it. So they're the 3 points that I would make in terms of how you do it better for next year. But I think generally, one should be always trying to say, so what are we going to do different next year? That should be happening in January and February and March, so that by the time you get to a budget, you can actually say, hey, here's what we're going to be doing.
Shelley?
Well, actually, Mr. Sewell just answered a lot of what I was going to ask him about how we would go about breaking this down, because I think we should be able to do what you're asking for within this budget. So if by the time the board is adopting this budget at a full board meeting, if we were delivering to them, yes, this is the reduction in uniform officers, and yes, Tavis is gone, and this is where they will go from. You think that level of detail will save us a level of controversy, for one thing, because we might think it's great to reduce officers and then get to council of the whole and have them say, oh, you can't cut police officers. So telling them how and where and what is the impact should be there in this year's budget.
I have no quarrel with that. And similarly, I understand that if you could tomorrow get rid of 2 officers in a car and you get rid of the shift schedule into something more reasonable, you'd save, then there wouldn't be nobody would complain about where the officers are going, because but you can't do that. I realize that. And that's one of the constraints about the problem you've got about getting rid of 150 officers. And that's why it's so critical. So where are you getting rid of them?
Right. And that's a challenge, because the transformational task force and the budget process are kind of running along parallel calendars right now.
I understand.
But to the extent that we can, we should be able to articulate that better by the time we're presenting this to the board.
I would hope so. Well, maybe you can't do it by next week. I don't know. But the point is that before the year starts, it would be really nice to say, here's what we're planning on doing. And the point is, you might be planning on it, and then you can't for various reasons do it. We understand that. That's life.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Dion. Dion, 5 minutes on $1 billion budget.
To commend Deirdre, Sandy, and Carlene on the work that they've been doing for the online portion, which allows us to see some things because the links directly link you to the page rather than having to scroll through. So that's an improvement that I've seen. I wanted to say that outside of my 5 minutes. With regards to the 5 minutes now and the budget, I agree fully with what Mr. Sewell has said. It's very complicated to try to find the detail of information you want to see in this budget, even though it's 500 pages. And something specific to my concern is that when I was trying to go, and I have to admit that I have not been able to complete the review of it, so I'm very partial in the comments that I'm making right now. But from what I've reviewed so far, I do have some concerns as to the issues that really affect the public, such as discipline hearings that you have listed on page 15. There's some mention of this, but there's no cost outcome as to how much it costs to do this other than just giving generalizations. And it's a bit frustrating because I see that they want to hire more superintendents in that position, but it appears to me that you can have 5 civilians that would do the same job. I'm not sure what the civilians do or compared to what the superintendents do, but you could have 5 civilians do the same job for less of hiring an additional superintendent for that position. And because we're not clear as to the breakdown, I was also trying to find a very important aspect of Toronto Police Services, and that is the child exploitation services. I actually tweeted about it, I called, and no one seems to know where it falls under what operational aspect. And so I'm curious today to hear an answer as to where child exploitation services falls under. And as you are aware, this deals with child pornography, online abuse of children, all of these things that I am having a hard time finding out what the expense is for that department. The reason why I'm looking at that specifically, because about 2 years ago I was looking into this and there was a comment made because I think a great thing that the police is doing is contacting the different detectives and sergeants and asking their opinions. So I was reading all of their opinions. And one of them said that it was underfunded, the child exploitation services, both staff-wise and finance-wise. And I think that the most vulnerable in our society should be protected and money should be going towards that rather than conducted energy weapons and militarized devices and rifles and things that just boggles the public's mind on that. So I'm still curious where we can find that, how much money is being allocated to that department, whether it's gone up or not. I've not been able to compare that, and I've not been able to see that in this budget. And that's why I agree with what Mr. Sewell is saying. There's no breakdown so the public can support the police budget to say, yeah, we agree that money should go towards this and less towards that. The other point that I wanted to make is, I think on my Thank you for your patience. Is with regards to, I'm not able to see, and as you know, I keep advocating for the health of the members of the service. I'm still not able to find that in the breakdown, how that's being allocated, whether there's specific funds going directly. I think it's great, the benefits are up, because I think that our service members should have the best benefits for the job that they do. What I want to know is, how are those benefits being allocated? We already know that there are only 2 psychologists for the whole 5,000 plus members. This is a problem. I don't see where you're increasing, adding more psychologists. I know that there was a budget that was removed from the last agenda. So I don't see that breakdown here. And I want to know that our members of our services are treated in a way that they feel they're getting the best help that they need access to. That includes psychological services, that includes the improvements on the internet site to direct people as to how to find that information. All of those things should be easy. Mr. Venciano and I were supposed to have a meeting. That never turned out. And remember, that was since July. And I'm a bit perplexed at that because I'm advocating on behalf of members of the service who are still not getting the help that they're needing to get under the presumptive legislation, especially regarding PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then, as Mr. Sewell has already said, we don't know yet what the public's position is on body-worn cameras or the conducted energy weapons. So it is a curiosity that I guess you're guessing for this. I'm not sure what this was all about. Are you guessing for what the intention is? I'm not sure. But that's something that needs to be clear because, quite frankly, when it comes to body-worn cameras, we're really advocating that the Information Privacy Commissioner's Office has the control of that. That's what we're advocating right now. And as you know, there's a review going on of the SIU, of the police services, and all foundations that fall under the Police Services Act. So to make a decision on information technology when it can be someone else's department, I'm not sure how you're going to deal with that, whether you're going to take that and direct it somewhere else once you will allocate it, or how that all works. And then the last part is, where do we find how much is allocated for lawsuits? Suits against the police. I was curious about that. I was trying to find this in the budget, and I still can't find it. Is it under errors and omissions? If it is, I can't find errors and omissions. So I'm trying to see how the board really puts together the police services puts together its budget, what the money is actually being spent on, and where the money actually goes. Those might be the same point, but it really is a concern that I am not clear on that. And like Mr. Sewell, maybe not as well as he does it, but I'm very detail-oriented and like to know the facts of the issues. But last point, and I thank you for giving me a few extra seconds, is really, this is, as was noted, how much this budget is, and we only had this a week in advance, some of us only since Friday. This is not acceptable, and it's really a concern that, you know, we have the meetings in the daytime. I've raised it, and I'd like to know whether or not the body-worn cameras are going to be in the evening for the next meeting on the 20th, because that's been asked. Haven't had a response. And I also want to know that these types of meetings, such as the budget meetings, are given out at least a month in advance, and also in the evening so people can attend. I recognize that there are other nuances, that you get something from the city and that communication and that disconnect, but we all have to do a better job in informing the public as to what we're actually spending money on, because after all, it is the public's money to spend. Thank you.
Colleagues? Shelley?
I have to put my city budget hat back on. With the respect to disclosing the amount of money that's available for legal challenges, I'm sympathetic to not highlighting that in the police budget, because we actually don't at the city, and there are far more claims there for every crack in every sidewalk. We don't actually put the global amount in a prominent, highlighted way in the public portion of the budget, because then every lawyer knows the size of the bread box. I'm wondering if that is explanation enough for you when it comes to the police budget.
I don't think so, because there needs to be, for example, when you have the expenses from the previous year, nobody knows what was spent on litigation because it's not highlighted, it's not clear. And that actually, from some research that's been done with the Toronto Star, is a large portion of the police budget, it turns out, for expenses. So the problem is that I hear you on what you're saying in advance, how much that covers as what we're going to set aside, but the public still needs to know certain things, such as if you wanted to do expense-wise for the year previous, that needs to be highlighted and clarified. I understand the position of the city and what you've just said, but at least from last year or the years previous, that should be something clear that people know. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask a question similar to the one I asked Mr. Sewell, because what I'm thinking about as I sit here is how could next year we do a better job, but I'm also very aware that this budget isn't going to change much, practically speaking, but you know, the $1 billion budget next year will be $1 billion more or less. So you have in front of you as much information as I think we've given ever before. I appreciate given late, not necessarily in the right categories. It would be helpful, and I'm not convinced this is something I could fairly ask for today, but it would be helpful for someone like me to understand if the community wanted to design the budget categories that were helpful to it, what would those categories be? And you can certainly rely on the information you have, and perhaps there's additional information that would be useful to you, such as the information on the costs of litigation and the costs of items that aren't clearly extricated. So I leave that with you perhaps more than as a question. It would be good for me to hear how the information could be better presented, in addition to what I heard from Mr. Sewell, in categories that might make it plainer so that we can actually have more meaningful conversations around where the money is being spent.
Mm-hmm. I think you said it very distinctly, plainly, right? And if you need to be able to find information such as Mr. Sewell has already identified, the specific breakdown. So, child exploitation services. This is a big deal. The public wants to know what's going on with this, and why does this department only have, I think it was 8 members, and they rotate sometimes because of the trauma that's experienced by being in that position. So, this is for all of Toronto, notwithstanding you're doing international things, because this becomes an international thing when you're working on the internet and the exploitation of children. That is not clear, and I doubt that there would be anyone in the public that if they know that of that $1 billion budget, that 25% of that $1 billion goes towards this, and increasing the staffing in that department, and increasing the technology for that. Because we're just hearing information technology. Well, what is the information technology for? Is it just for everybody's cell phones and Blackberries? Or is it specific to these departments that need the help? Women, murdered and missing Indigenous women. What is the money allocated towards that? Is the public aware? Because we keep thinking nothing's being done. So yes, I agree with what Mr. Sewell is already saying. The breakdown of those, when you hear, and I think this is a great way where policing and community comes together, where the police should follow the news like everybody else. So if these are important topics to the public, body-worn cameras, murdered or missing Indigenous women, child exploitation, lawsuits, all these things that you know that are of public interest, that should definitely be captured in the reporting. And then certainly, there's no harm in talking to someone like Mr. Sewell in the group that he works with, right? To say, hey, in advance, are these things, and what else would you like to see? In advance of that, so that you can craft it to be explanatory that way. And the reality is there are many community members who are already doing this work in advance for you. And this is where we talk about modernization of policing and community, working with community to put forward the issues that we want to see happen. I think the part of the disconnect, member Dunnoria, no, that's Dr. I'm sorry.
Mulliner.
Thank
Marie
you.
Mulliner.
Thank you,
Yes.
Member Mulliner. My brain.
No worries.
Part of the difficult...
Brown women, you know, we all look the same.
That's right. That's right. We all look the same. The issue is sometimes the disconnect, and I think this is also part of the overhaul of Police Services Act, of operations and the board's role, right? And the operations will say, well, this is how much we need, but really that comes down to the board as to what the board gives. So if you don't know what you're giving money to, it's a problem, because are you then acting in the best interests of this board, of the public? And furthermore, I think that's where you have the greatest power in this relationship, in that while the police may say they want this for the conducted energy weapons or for militarized rifles and all these different things, and the public saying, no, we don't want that. The public can't necessarily direct as per what everybody understands Police Services Act to say now, but we're trying to change that. In that you as the board can't direct the police on the operational, but you do direct them when it comes to the finances, because you give them the money for that. I'm not sure if this board can say, no, we don't want to spend this portion for those militarized weapons, but we do want you to allocate, we'll give you the same amount as long as you allocate that to the child exploitation. I'm not sure if this board can do that. I'm not clear on what the board's role is in determining aspects and breakdowns in a budget. And if you can redirect the police, the chief to put money here and no money for there, $0 for that, so many dollars for that. I'm not sure what this board can do. If that's the case, yes, you would have the support of the public in that respect, because we want to say no money for this and yes, money for this. And does this board have that power to do that, or does it take the position to do that? Thank you.
Other comments, colleagues? Tony, anything? Okay.
Are we still going to have a
Done.
meeting, sir?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Miguel? Five minutes, Miguel.
Thank you for the reminder.
You're welcome.
I was not going to speak on this matter, but I decided this early morning that I couldn't sleep. I cannot allow myself, forgive myself to not to come and speak. I've been doing this for the last 5 years, thanks to the work of John Sewell. I think he's the one who inspired me to come every year to the board meetings and talk about the budget. It's not a very popular budget among many organizations. I just want to go for the record that I did communicate with several members of the community. In particular, I contacted the people behind the poverty reduction strategy that it was originated by Deputy Mayor Pam McConnell. I invited all the members of the commitment to community. I invited members of several organizations that want to reduce poverty, but however, they did not reply. It is very sad, very depressing to hear that no one is interested in coming and speak, but they would like to talk about more about transit perhaps, or perhaps they want to talk about more about housing, but this seems to be the end of lack of interest for the public. But anyway, I'm here to speak on this budget, 494 pages. Thank you so much for making available the breakdown. I guess that's one of the recommendations we made last year. In regards to the proposal or the rumors I heard about getting rid of the parking enforcement officers and the department, the whole department, well, I have empathy for those who are going to lose their jobs if this board decided to cut their jobs. But at the same time, they will say, the members of that force will say, well, how come you're not doing anything to remove the bad apples in the Toronto Police Service, who are, costing a lot of money? Dion, thank you, Dion, for bringing up the issue of lawsuits. We don't have that information, but we are protecting several members of this force through their union arbitration that are costing the city a leg and an arm. And I think that if you're going to lose the parking enforcement officers, I think I would like to see also that parallel to that, until we hopefully wait results from the province to modify the Police Services Act. You can get your act together, and you know who they are. Human resources know who are the bad apples in this force, and those are the ones who are costing a lot of money to taxpayers, and the chief knows that. So I would suggest you that you take that advice in consideration for the next full board meeting. I also want to recommend that the cards that are issued for the service pay duty, there are a total of 14 vehicles, I believe, and the CFO graciously provided me with the information when I made an FOI. So those 14 vehicles, instead of being used for the purpose of pay duty, why don't we eliminate them? Why don't we use them and turn it back to be used for other purposes and better use? So if you're looking ideas out of the box, that's one suggestion for you. Secondly, the civilian gapping, I'm curious to know, is the increase 11% is because some of our uniform officers, instead of being choose to by a collective agreement to quit the force, early retirement, instead are they going to move to a civilian position? I think you have to reduce, keep the same number of people that are not going to be hired this year for civilian positions. Instead, we need to reduce this property, this issue of the cost that we have. I just want to show you something for you to understand. There's a lot of Ontarians who have received this notice in the mail. It says to us, we have received a 1% increase in our salaries. Benefits. It's only 1%. And that's the reality that we have in the city. And please take the advice of what we able to say today at heart and understand that we are suffering, and it's time for the police services to bite the bullet and get a grip of reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions, colleagues? Okay. Do you want to wait till the end of there's two more depositions? Okay. Thank you, Miguel. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll use Renee's comments here and say, well, before my time starts, That seems to work well. So just on a point of order here, I would suggest that the capital budget should actually be a separate 5 minutes from the operating budget, and I'm assuming that the board's one-page budget will be a separate time that we're going to talk about that separately. So I'll speak on the operating budget, and we'll see if I get to the capital budget as well. So starting my time now. Going through this, unfortunately, given the amount of time, I didn't get to go through the full thing. So I actually spent my time, for the most part, concentrating on the individual unit level figures. And in looking at those, what I'm seeing is that in many cases, we've got a situation where there was a number of staff allocated for the 2016 budget, that the reality of the actual strength now is below that level, and then the proposal is that the 2017 is going back up to that, at least that 2016 budget level, if not higher. So really that is circumventing, it seems, the whole hiring freeze that's been in play here. In looking, just going through the individual units here, I noticed, for example, in the under the first section for the Chief of Police command structure, we're going from a total of 53 staffing to 67 proposed for 2017. So that's a 45% increase in uniform staff and a 10% increase in civilian staff. And I'm concerned that, first of all, throughout the budget, there doesn't seem to be any justification given for why uniformed staff are being proposed versus civilian. We know that the discussions we've always been having here for the last few years is that all these things are getting civilianized to reduce costs, and yet throughout the budget, in many cases, there's a proposal that they're going to increase the uniform strength for different departments with no indication of why uniformed officers are being proposed and what it is that they need to be doing. Specifically, I noticed that for the chief's office, there's a proposal to have 4 police constables under the chief, and I'm not sure why, for example, those would need to be constables. They're certainly not going to be people that are out doing arrests. I don't see them needing to be armed with weapons working in the chief's office. So I question that, and that comes up throughout this whole throughout the whole first part of the budget anyways, at the unit level. In going back to the presentation, I noticed that we were talking about a potential $14.9 million in a loss of provincial salary grants. I would say that at that point then, you should be reducing the budget by that amount. And when the questions come for why are there fewer police, you can respond to the media that, well, that's up to the province. Go talk to them about why they aren't giving us the money. And you can pass the buck back up to them. I also noticed in the presentation that when we were looking at the bar chart of salaries, and you'll notice that from the period of 2006 to 2016, salaries went up 30%, while staffing levels actually went down. So the idea that in the last decade, police officers have gotten a 30% or more increase in salary is, quite frankly, ridiculous. And it comes down to, I've said before, if we need to turn around and say, well, you have fewer officers that you're expected to do the same amount of work with because you're getting more money, that's the way it works in the real world. If you get a pay increase over and above what the cost of living is, then you're expected to do more work for it. And I think we have to expect the same from police officers. I note that last year in the budget, there was $300,000 for the purchase of the C8s. It wasn't a line item in the previous budget, and yet throughout the year that number came up and the money was there to go buy those without coming to the board and asking for extra funds. So somewhere in there are these amounts of money that are available and simply not laid out. And so I would say that, well, whatever's being asked for, you can take $300,000 off that. I see I'm running out of is that from my 5 minutes or my 4? Okay. Thank you. The corporate communications, the media section, you've got 7 uniformed constables doing media releases. Why are those uniformed officers and not civilian officers, unless that's light duty services that maybe that's the case. But we have under the corporate communications section, they talk about number of media releases. But when you do the math for 7 constables, that only works out to an average of 2.2 media releases a day. So that there just seems to be throughout this, when you look at the details, a question of what are these people doing and where is their time spent? And that's not in the budget. And as somebody with a financial background, that's what I expect to see, is a justification, not just for, I want these many dollars, but what are the people doing with that money? I'll jump one more thing, if I may. Just on the human resources side, they're looking for a proposed increase in the staffing for human resources, and yet the employment unit, it's a 67% drop from 2014 to 2016 in the number of civilian applications, and just under 50% drop in civilian hires, and yet they're increasing the staffing level in that department. So throughout what I've looked at, those issues come up. Now, there is also the 2 quick points on the capital budget. So if I can just...
So you want, okay, you're at 7 minutes now, Chris.
I'm a fan of this.
Okay. We'll give you a couple of seconds, Chris. Okay, Chris, rock and roll.
Just on the conducted energy weapons, and this has been brought up before, but I look back to, there was a meeting here where this board put a moratorium on the expansion of conducted energy weapons. I didn't actually speak at that meeting, but I recall it for one reason, because that's the only time I've ever seen that whole side of the room break out into applause at the end of when this board voted to put that moratorium in place. And now we've got the situation where the budget approval is coming through for these weapons, and the expectation is then that at some point they're going to come along and say, well, we've got the budget approved, we're going to buy these or expand the use of conducted energy weapons, despite the fact that that moratorium still exists.
Just because it's in a budget doesn't mean, as I try to say to Mr. Sewell, doesn't mean that it's approved. It's yet to come. We're planning for it. Whether it gets approved or not, we've got a process to go through. The moratorium was, I think, at least 3 years ago. And so it's time to review it again, that's why it's on the agenda.
Well, but should we not be discussing whether or not we think they're warranted? I've said before that I think cameras have to come before the weapons, the conducted energy weapons. I think back to, we had the one situation where we know that video evidence of the in-car cameras showed one of the people on the service currently armed with a CEW having threatened to taser a gentleman both in the throat and in the groin.
Chris, again, those are board discussions still to come.
Okay, but if we approve the money, if the money's there, like the C8s, it will be spent.
The money has to be there, because we can't want to go through and suppose one of them does get through and then say, well, we can't do it. So, yes, does it mean we may be optimistic? Yes, but we have to start somewhere. So it's a request that's coming forward. We're planning for it, but the discussion, the debate, the public debate has not been held yet.
Okay. Oh, absolutely, yes. And then on the body-worn cameras here, I find it staggering that we're basically looking at $500,000 to hire somebody to basically oversee the bidding process and to get some technical expertise on cameras, when we've had basically 18 months of a pilot project that cost us, according to this, $432,000, and we didn't have that expertise. And so now, having done the pilot project, we're now going to spend $500,000. I think we could hire somebody, for fairness, for $10,000 to oversee that, if that's really needed.
Chris, thank you. a new record, 10 minutes.
Well, that's the two items.
Yeah, I know, you tried to make
I
that.
appreciate that, sir.
Mark or Tony, any response? I mean, I presume Chris's first comment about down in divisions, up in divisions is really the reflection of the task force and the fact that people are being redeployed.
We are going down and have gone down and
Right.
continue to go down number of officers. So if we're going up in one area, that means we're going down in another area. So you can't just look at one area, but that's
Right.
exactly what you said is exactly right.
Right, right. So you can't just look at the online divisions. And Mark, obviously, as we ramp up, and you're going to be charged with the implementation of this starting, because the final report, task force report, is due January 20th. And one assumes that with all the work done, that will get approved. It's the chief's job then to implement those recommendations as opposed to study them, and et cetera, et cetera.
That's correct, Chair.
Any colleagues, any questions, any comments? Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you twice. Derek, did you want to? You're not on the list, but I take it from your body language, you'd like to make a deposition.
I emailed Deirdre on Friday, actually.
Okay, didn't get there, but
Okay.
thank you.
So I have an objection to make regarding this budget breakdown.
5 minutes.
Just like everyone else got, right?
Yeah. No, just get going.
So this is page 440 of the budget breakdown. Administrative penalty system, APS, for parking violations. The province of Ontario has made removing parking ticket trials from the provincial courts a priority. At its July 12, 2016 meeting, council adopted the report on the administrative penalty system for parking violations. I'm just going to go ahead and finish the rest of the sentence for you guys. Against the wishes of the Attorney General and the Government of Ontario. You weren't here last month, Councillor Carroll. I read an article that Alison Jones of the Canadian Press did on May 1st of this year. And she quoted Jenna Manone, a spokeswoman for the Attorney General. Jenna Manone said, based on the feedback we received, we have decided to focus our efforts on improving the existing court-based system for disputing and paying traffic tickets and other POA charges, rather than pursuing an administrative monetary penalty AMP model. Nowhere in this first part did Jenna Manone say the province of Ontario has made removing parking ticket trials from the provincial courts a priority. In fact, what I just read basically says the complete opposite of what this just said. So, I'm not going to sit here, Chair Pringle, and pretend that you wrote this whole almost 500-page report. But I'm completely gobsmacked at this point, because barring any objections, I don't know how else to put this, but this first part here, based on what I said last month, and Councillor Lee, I just about fell out of my chair because I thought someone was going to ask me a question for the first time, but he's turned and thanked me for bringing this, what I said, my concerns, to the board. So obviously he knows what's going on is not right. I don't know how else to put this, but this part right here is nothing more than just a blatant lie. A lie that is now part of the public record by the Toronto Police Services Board on the internet for anyone to see. Now maybe it's a mistake. I am aware of the doctrine of mistake in law, but mistakes eventually have to be corrected. But until it is, I don't know how else to put it, it's just a lie. You people, not only Chief Saunders and his officers, everyone on this board took an oath to uphold the Constitution. Again, Councillor Lee's not here, but I spoke at Public Works recently, and he heard me mention Eldridge versus British Columbia Attorney General, 1997. The Supreme Court said, the sentiment of Lord Atkin in speaking of a constitutional prohibition addressed solely at the legislative branch is also a posit. The Constitution, he wrote, is not to be mocked by substituting executive for legislative interference. James versus Cowan, somewhere from Australia. at that government management committee, actually it was Councillor Davis who spoke up and said, you know what, after I spoke, you know what about that? I haven't heard much about this. I know what people are going to say, that this is just a more efficient tax grab. Whoever the city staff that spoke to her said, her response was basically, well, it's okay because we amended a regulation stuck in the back of the City of Toronto Act that no one, 99% of the people don't even know or have ever read the City of Toronto Act, let alone know about this regulation. You all know that I've said back in January, the City of Toronto Act is invalid and of no force or effect to begin with, as it lacks the enacting clause required of it of Section 6 of the Legislation Act. So what I see here now is just, I don't know, it's as if this board wants to help the City of Toronto to mock the Constitution that every board member took an oath to uphold, by almost compounding fraud upon fraud. You're disobeying the Attorney General's office and the Government of Ontario by helping to enforce these stuff that's not even valid, because the City of Toronto Act's invalid to begin with. So you said I had 1 minute?
Yeah, you got 30 seconds now, Derek.
I mean, everyone else got 10 minutes, and
Well,
I'm the one under the
you're going
gun.
to speak on the capital budget, but you can have another minute, and then, okay?
All right, again, I'll read the bottom part. Now, Mayor Tory's probably thinking, oh, Derek, don't be like that. Our phony screening officers will be fair and impartial. Oh, okay, well, this is what the Supreme Court of Canada has to say, implying about how ethical municipalities are. McKinney versus University of Guelph, 1999, Supreme Court of Canada. Municipalities perform a quintessentially government function. They enact coercive laws binding on the public generally, for which offenders may be punished. We must bear in mind that the role of the Charter is to protect the individual against the coercive power of the state, or as one council put it, to enable the citizen to fight City Hall. Godbout versus Longueuil, City of Longueuil, 1997, Supreme Court of Canada. As regards municipalities, it consists in the much broader discretion to adopt and enforce, again, coercive laws binding on a defined territory. Stated simply, a government or an entity acting in a governmental capacity could circumvent the Charter, not simply by granting certain of its powers to other entities, but also by itself pursuing governmental initiatives through means other than the traditional mechanism of government action, i.e. the formal enactment of coercive laws. This kangaroo court tribunal, the City of Toronto is going to be wearing two hats. It goes against the maxim of law that no one shall be the judge in their own cause. And it's not right, and this board is basically facilitating it.
Derek, thank you very much. Colleagues, questions for Derek? Yeah, okay. Okay, colleagues, general discussion, questions of staff. Shelley, you said you had a couple?
Well, yeah, I have a few under each of the deputants' matters. So I'll go in order. The deputation from Mr. Sewell, is it possible to have for us, by the time we're presenting this to the board, to have the breakdown? Because I very much appreciate this, because I struggled through the tiny print spreadsheet that we got my own self, because when you're looking at the spreadsheet, you see, compliments going up and down. Overall, we see a reduction. And I started down that path looking for what are the real impacts of TAVIS. And then you realize, well, then I need to understand how they were deployed in the first place. And now I need to understand where they're leaving. Can we get at, in terms of giving comfort both to the community and to council, because they'll get political about this, where the reductions in complement are, both civilian and uniform, and more unit by unit flesh it out in time for when we're presenting the budget to the full board to be adopted?
Right now, we're reducing our budget by not replacing people that leave, but we don't get to choose which people leave. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that
so it's all just straight gapping, which
right,
is
there's a right-sizing exercise that we have to go through. And I agree with Mr. Sewell that we are moving to what we would call program budgeting, that gives the public and the board a greater idea. And we've done it to a certain extent, but I think we can go a little bit further. So we talk about enforcement. How much do we spend on enforcement? How much do we spend on investigative services? How much do we spend on community policing? How much do we spend on infrastructure? How much do we spend on administration? Those are all programs that we want to get to and give the board and the public a better idea of where their money is being spent. Right now, though, through the task force and the implementation of some of those recommendations, the chief and the command and the task, working with the task force, we're going through an exercise of actually right-sizing where we're going down officers. Where do we allocate that reduction so that the services that the public gets and the risks associated with some of those things are mitigated to the extent that we can.
Not just where do we allocate it,
Right.
but some of them are coming out of areas like the expansion of the transit police, but they then get repurposed into the various divisions, which is why Derek sees or why Chris sees it going up as people, we're driving a more community-centric model. But
Right,
Is
but
this,
that's
this is
not
in the
gapping.
process.
Is that
That's not
part of
gapping.
this year's budget?
So as the
I'm only on 2016. So if that's not part of 2016, if it is, it should be in there. If it's not, then can we have at least a descriptor statement that says that this will be done strictly through gapping, but the comfort statements have to be that where that compromises the function of a division or a specific unit, at the chief's discretion, there'll be redeployments.
So-
So that there are no surprises.
So we're talking uniforms here. Gapping
Yeah,
does-
start with uniforms,
So
yeah.
to uniforms, gapping doesn't apply. People leave throughout the organization at various ranks. TABIS and transit. TABIS, a decision, right now we have a transit unit. It works out of Oxford property, right? We've now decided through the task force that we are going to disband the transit unit as well as TABIS, which is also
Right.
currently operating. The people that are in both those units, the uniform officers, the majority of that, they get redeployed to the field. They get redeployed to other parts of the service. TABIS, for the most part, will go back to divisional units. Transit may go. That's something that the chief and command will decide based on where the priorities are in the service. And quite frankly, and the chief can talk to this better than I can, those priorities evolve sometimes day to day, depending on where the services are needed most. So, but right now, we're redeploying those people back into operations. So transit and TABIS won't exist, but the people do exist, and they go back to the
Right.
field.
And then on top of that, to get the reduction, you're projecting the number of officers that will retire out. So the statements that you just said are not sensitive statements. We could have them in the document, so there's a record that this is sort of the transition year before we get to really enacting the meat of the transformational task force. So even a statement like that,
Sure.
that says these units are going within this budget year, and they will be redeployed at Chief Saunders' discretion, and we're projecting this many people leaving, which then explains to people, we're not changing the model in the 2016 year. We really are just projecting retirements, and the units that we're shutting down are going to fill gaps where the leaving happened in places we didn't want to happen. And that really would tell the story then, that you're right, there's no fancy model change yet. The discussions that we need to have in this community and at this board table about how we change the delivery model aren't bearing fruit yet. We're just we're just projecting how many people will retire and filling gaps until we get to the bigger changes in TTF. But I think we have to make that clear
Sure,
in the budget.
we can definitely make that clear in the budget presentation in October, or October 20th.
Okay. Just so that as we go forward and we talk about, these are the things that having a transformational task force did for us, we won't be making real substantive change with a lot of baby boomers retired, because that's not really transformation. Yeah. That's a meaningful statement to me. The issue that Renee raised of highlighting highlighting within the budget what we know people are looking to see progress on, and they look for it in budget documents, because that's the sort of annual overview for them. The concept of, in our budget presentation, both for the subcommittee and as it goes to the board, the concept of reading the papers as a way of intuiting what you must highlight in the budget. If we could do a little more of that as we arrive at presenting it to the board, I thought that was a really good way of putting it. That's how you intuit what people are looking for. You really can't just throw in, we're putting a placeholder for more CEWs, knowing that it's a controversial item in the community without putting pending board approval, much discussion to come. You really need to say pending a report coming. We know that there's another report coming on the BWCs, and while we have approved the way we're going to tender, we still have another report back. I think we need to footnote that into the budget, or we're asking for a pretty excitable meeting. And Chris raised the same question. And lastly, the big question, and I apologize if you went over it already and I missed it, but the contradictory statements around APS, is this an issue of the community members not up to date? Has the province changed their tune, or is there a mistake in our documentation?
We are, the City Council actually approved moving forward with APS at the July 2016 meeting. City staff has advised us and put us on notice that our handheld devices will now have to have digital capability in terms of photos. And so we're basically acting on the decision that was made by City Council.
But the
we're
province,
now having
the provincial statement, that's from our documentation as well?
No, this we really don't have anything to do with that. It's really between the city and the province. We're just enacting what the city has asked us to do.
So the statement that the province has changed the statement the deputy read is that the province is prioritizing APS. And he says that's in our document. Is that in our document or the city's document? Because if it's in a city report, this is not the place to have that issue.
Ours is strictly based on the city. We don't reference the province at all.
Okay, but a city staff report probably did, and that's the
I'm
place
not
to
aware,
pursue
but
this.
probably
Sounds
did.
like a couple of councillors probably are pursuing it if they've made the wrong statement there. But you are, in terms of your partnership delivery of parking enforcement, you are at the mercy of City Council. If their interpretation of the City of Toronto Act, which I believe to be valid until someone tells me it's not, because we're certainly taxing people on the basis of that act. If it's invalid, that's really news to me.
Councillor Kerr, on that, just so the board
Yeah.
budget subcommittee and the public are aware, that's going to require an additional investment beyond the 2.5 that's already in our life cycle reserve. So we're
Right.
probably looking at another 2.5 million to actually enact something that City Council approved. That, in talking to city staff, is going to be in our budget, so you'll see that at the October 20th meeting, and it will go through the process. Remember, all of these things, whether they're
But is it
CWs,
implementable in 2017 if there's that much involved
we
in
have to
it?
go to market, we have to actually buy the devices, so we're hoping that it's going to be implemented towards the end of 17 or probably
I
18.
was just going to say, this is probably like a third quarter thing.
And just so, and I know we could have been more definitive in this, everything that's in the document, whether operating or capital, is subject to board discussion and approval. You will see a report, I think, at the next board meeting on CEWs that gives much more information on that. So, all of this is subject to board consideration and approval. But I do appreciate the comments that are coming from the public in terms of how we can improve the process moving forward. So, thank you.
Which brings me to my last question. You just segued beautifully into it, Tony. The issue of the lifeguards and the school crossing guard program. If I put my city budget hat on, it's going to take longer to do that than we expected. If that can't be transferred this year, or are you further ahead in conversations than I am? If that can't be transferred this year in full cost, how does that impact us? What percentage do we end up having to hang on to in our budget?
Timelines, I think, are that we've written a letter to the mayor, the task force has written a letter to the mayor saying that we expect to be out of the crossing guard business by September of 17.
So is
And,
$3.8 million one quarter's worth of expense, or is that 12
So
months of
the
expense?
$3.8 million, 1.1, so the lifeguards, everything working out the way it should, the city could take that over in probably March or April, so they'd be ready for the summer season of 2017. The school crossing guards, only a portion of it, September to December, is in our budget as savings for 2017 because you're only
Okay.
paying, 4 months of it. The remainder will be, so the annualized impact of that is probably double that, around 7.8 million.
Right.
So, but our budget in 2017 reflects 3.8, 1.1 for the lifeguards and 2.7 for the school crossing guards.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Marie, questions?
My question may actually end up being for you, Mr. Chair, around the task force view about implementing some innovative processes like participatory budgeting. But I wanted to get a sense from Tony or the chief around, we've heard today, I think this is the most transparent since I've been on the board we've been able to be. And of course, these are early steps, and I think, I really appreciated the feedback both from the deputants and the way that your team worked to give us what we had, because you made it, as I said to you at one of the earlier meetings, the simplest possible so that someone like me could actually follow it, so I appreciate that. If you were to think about, and you've reflected on some of the comments already, what you've heard today and perhaps how you might restructure it, I heard Shelley's observation, which I echo, that the program delivery model or the issue-based model might be helpful. How would you think of doing this if you had nothing but time between now and the 20th of October to present it in a way that would be more from a public-facing perspective?
I think, quite frankly, we've taken a very good first step in trying to achieve. I mean, with respect, I think the line by line or the unit summaries were actually about 900 pages before, so we've actually reduced them to 490. But you see the issue that we face, right? So you've got some that say we don't need it by salaries and we just want the unit cost, right? Others are saying, well, I want to know, like child exploitation is part of sex crimes. I want to know how much child exploitation costs. So part of our challenge is trying to forecast or predict at what level and which units are important to people. And we can read newspapers certainly and try to help that guide us in terms of where the hot buttons are. But we're going to take what was said today and hopefully build on that in terms of the future. I quite frankly think from both the board oversight as well as the public, knowing the information at a program level or at a unit level that gives you an idea of, the mounted unit costs us X and accounting costs us Y, gives you at least an idea of relative to the $1 billion, how much are we spending in that area. So I think that is the detail we'd like to. But remember, we were criticized when we didn't give enough detail. We were criticized when we were just giving you the $1 billion and nothing else. Now we've moved forward, and now we're being criticized for maybe giving too much detail. So I'm hoping through these processes, we're actually going to find some balance that satisfies both the public and respects the board's oversight role.
Marie, just to answer your question, the Transformational Task Force came down with its interim report in June. If you look at it, that was really a vision report as to where we saw things going. The details now are being worked on. It's I think quite a bit more work to put the flesh on the bones as to exactly how we're going to come forward and do that. So all aspects of the service are being reviewed, but and there is discussion about finance, but we're not down to the details of how we're going to present budgets, et cetera. Don't forget the Transformational Task Force really represents a change in thinking for the police, period. It is a first step at moving us to, being where the public needs us most, to being community-centric, and recognizing that we don't police every community in the same way. And while we're going to come forward with the report on January the 20th at that board meeting, which will then be implemented by the chief, it won't stop the process of continuing to improve. And I think that you'll see the details of budget stuff come in that second half. There's still an awful lot of work to do around shift schedules, around all kinds of things that have been talked about, which is really the deployment of personnel. Mark, anything that you want to add about that's really your budgets?
No, I certainly appreciate the deputants for the comments that were made, and we're looking forward to figuring out what the hybrid is that's going to satisfy the majority of people.
Yeah, any other questions, any comments? We had scheduled the board budget is about $2.3 million, but the bottom line is that Joanne is not here today, so we will be doing it at the next budget subcommittee. But don't worry about it, it's not. So who's going to present it? Okay, well, I think we'll just take it to the next meeting. If there's no other questions or comments, Shelley, you look like you may have one more question or comment in you. If you don't said my last was a minute ago, you're starting to sound like. Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay, everybody, thank you very much.